"You're 7 months pregnant?" I choked out. "Claire, I've been gone 13." She didn't even blink, just sipped her smoothie and said, "It's a miracle." But the only miracle was how calmly she handed me divorce papers the next day, after draining our joint account, listing another man as the baby's father, and filing under abandonment. Then I saw the kicker. They were naming the kid after me. That's when I knew. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a setup. They thought I'd walk away broken, but I'd spent 13 months rebuilding engines in a war zone. Now, I'm about to rebuild everything they tried to destroy. But before we begin, let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. My name is James Whelan, and I'm 33 years old. After 13 months fixing Humvees in Afghanistan's dust and danger, I'm finally heading home to my wife Claire and our quiet suburban house in Indiana. The deployment changed me, gave my hands new calluses and my mind sharper edges. My former CO, Ed Thompson, handed me his Special Service Medal before I left, telling me to keep it close when life gets complicated. Lately, something's been off in Claire's voice during our calls. Shorter conversations, fewer "I love yous," strange pauses where warmth used to live. Her last message sits heavy in my phone. "We'll talk when you're home." I run my thumb over Ed's medal in my pocket, trying to ignore how the metal feels colder than it should. But let me start from the beginning. The front door creaked open, familiar but somehow different, like an old friend who'd changed sides. The house smelled wrong, antiseptic, and sweet, nothing like the lavender air fresheners Claire used to love. You know that moment when your gut knows something's off, but your brain's still playing catch-up? Yeah, that was me stepping into my own living room. "Claire?" My voice echoed through the house. Footsteps from upstairs. Then she appeared at the top of the stairs. And my world stopped. Ever had reality hit you so hard your mind just breaks? Claire stood there, 7 months pregnant, wearing one of those flowing maternity dresses. My duffel bag hit the floor with a thud that felt like it came from miles away. The math started running through my head like a broken calculator. 13 months deployed, 7 months pregnant. No matter how many times I ran the numbers, they wouldn't add up. "Welcome home," she said, her voice flat as Kansas. No tears, no smile, nothing. Just those cold blue eyes I used to get lost in, now studying me like I was a stranger who'd wandered in off the street. "You're—" The word pregnant wouldn't come out. My throat felt like I'd swallowed sand. "It's a miracle, baby," Claire said, descending the stairs with one hand on the rail, the other resting on her swollen belly. The doctor said it had something to do with hormonal irregularities. They were surprised, too. I'd spent the last year dealing with insurgents, IEDs, and equipment that could kill you if you weren't paying attention. You develop a sense for lies out there. It keeps you alive. Right then? Every instinct I'd honed in the sandbox was screaming. 13 months, I managed. "I've been gone 13 months. "James." She said my name like she was talking to a child who didn't understand basic math. "Medical miracles happen. I have all the paperwork from the doctor if you want to see it." I didn't answer. Instead, I walked past her, up the stairs, my boots heavy on each step. The spare room, the one we'd always talked about turning into a nursery someday, was already set up. Crib assembled, changing table stocked, mobile hanging. Even the walls had been painted a soft yellow. This wasn't new. This wasn't a surprise to her. My training kicked in. Assess, analyze, maintain control. But my hands were shaking as I gripped the crib rail. The wood felt solid, real. This wasn't some desert mirage or combat fatigue. This was happening. I made my way to the guest room, dropped my bag, and sat on the bed. Through the wall, I could hear Claire moving around in our bedroom, our old bedroom. The mattress felt wrong, too soft after months of military cots. Or maybe everything just felt wrong now. A soft knock at the door. Claire stood in the doorway, one hand still absently rubbing her stomach. The gesture made me sick. "We need to talk," she said. "Tomorrow." I looked at her, really looked at her. No guilt in those eyes, no shame, just nothing. The woman I'd married, the one who used to run to the door when I came home on leave, who'd cry into my chest and tell me how much she'd missed me. That woman was gone. Or maybe she'd never existed at all. The next morning hit like a hangover, even though I hadn't touched a drop. I found Claire in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone while sipping some kind of green smoothie. The morning light caught her wedding ring, the one I'd saved 6 months of pay to buy. Let's hear it, I said, keeping my voice steady. Military training teaches you to face bad news head on. I've been seeing Dr. Matthews. She's a holistic fertility specialist. Claire set her phone down, launching into what felt like a rehearsed speech. She explained how stress and emotional disruption can cause hormonal shifts that affect conception windows, the deployment, the distance. It created this unique biological opportunity. You ever watch someone build a house of cards, knowing one breath will bring it down? That's what her explanation felt like. Cut the bullshit, Claire. The words came out harder than I meant, but I couldn't help it. I know enough basic biology to... That's exactly the problem, James. She cut me off, her voice taking on that wellness blogger tone she used in her videos. You see everything in black and white, mechanical parts that either work or don't. But the human body, especially a woman's body, is more complex than your Humvees. I had to laugh at that. 13 months fixing vehicles in a war zone, and she was lecturing me about understanding complex systems. While you were gone, she continued, I did a lot of spiritual work, connected with my inner truth. And the universe, she gestured to her belly, had other plans. The universe? Right. Because the universe apparently wore contractor polos and drove a lifted F-150. Over the next few days, Claire avoided me like I was radioactive. When we did talk, it was all about how I'd been emotionally unavailable during deployment, how my calls were too brief, too focused on logistics, how I wasn't ready for the miracle of fatherhood. Remember that medal in my pocket? I kept running my thumb over it, trying to ground myself in something real. Friday morning, I woke up to an empty house and a note on the kitchen counter. The kind of note that changes your life in 12 lines or less. James, I need space to prepare for this new chapter. My lawyer will be in touch about the divorce. I'm citing abandonment. It's cleaner this way. I've moved funds to a separate account for the baby's future. Please respect my privacy during this transition. C. I stood there reading it over and over, like maybe the words would rearrange themselves into something that hurt less. They didn't. The bank app confirmed what the note suggested. Our joint account had been drained. 15 years of service pay, gone. Even took the emergency fund I'd set up before deployment. The only thing left was this month's mortgage payment. You know what's worse than being betrayed? Being betrayed and knowing everyone else knew before you did. Sarah, our neighbor who used to watch our dog, caught me as I was checking the mail. James, She hugged herself, looking everywhere but at me. I should have said something when you first got back. Claire's been seeing someone, a contractor named Brent. He's been around since about 2 months after you deployed. 2 months. While I was still setting up my bunk in Afghanistan, this guy was setting up shop in my house. My lawyer called that afternoon, not with good news. James, we've got a situation. I'm looking at Claire's preliminary filing. She's listed someone named Brent Callister as the father on her prenatal documents. He signed an acknowledgement of paternity. The phone creaked in my grip. She what? It's a legal play. If we don't contest paternity before the birth, you could be on the hook for support even if... I hung up. Couldn't listen anymore. Just sat there in my empty house, surrounded by gaps where Claire's things used to be, trying to breathe through the rage and humiliation. The dog bed by the back door was gone. The fancy coffee maker she'd insisted on buying, gone. Even her stupid inspirational quotes on the wall had disappeared, leaving behind little holes where the nails used to be. 13 months in Afghanistan, and I'd never felt this alone. The Army teaches you to face problems head on. But this was like trying to defuse a bomb with both hands tied behind my back. My lawyer, Dan Mitchell, laid it out in his downtown office 3 days after Claire left. The place smelled like old coffee and printer paper. You know that smell? Reminds me of processing deployment paperwork, except this time I was fighting a different kind of battle. Here's our situation, James. Dan spread some documents across his desk. Indiana law is clear. If you're married when the child is born, you're presumed to be the father. We need to contest paternity before birth, or you could be legally responsible for child support. My throat went dry. For 18 years? Plus possible college expenses. He nodded grimly. We're talking north of $200,000 over the child's lifetime. I thought about all those nights in Afghanistan, fixing engines by flashlight, saving every penny I could. Now, it might all go to raising another man's kid. So, let's demand a paternity test, I said. That'll end this real quick. Dan shook his head. Claire's team is arguing that prenatal testing poses unnecessary risks. They're stalling James. They know exactly what they're doing. Of course they did. Claire might play the spiritual wellness card, but she was always calculating 3 moves ahead. That's what made her such a successful blogger. She knew how to manipulate a situation. "How long do we have?" I asked. "Court hearing in 6 weeks. After that?" He let the sentence hang there like a guillotine blade. You want to know what desperation feels like? Try watching your whole future get hijacked while the legal system moves slower than a convoy through Taliban territory. We filed motion after motion, requested medical records, tried to subpoena Claire's doctor. Her legal team blocked everything with paperwork and procedural delays. Meanwhile, the clock kept ticking. I couldn't sleep, kept running the numbers in my head. Child support, legal fees, the empty bank account. The Army had taught me to handle stress, but this was different. This was psychological warfare. Then came the social media gut punch. It was around midnight. Couldn't sleep again, scrolling through my phone when I saw it. Claire's Instagram post, her and Brent at some fancy baby shower. Her belly even bigger now, wrapped in this flowing white dress. Brent had his hand on it, grinning like he'd won the lottery. Which, I guess, he had. With my money. But the caption, that's what made my hands shake. Celebrating our miracle with friends and family. Can't wait to meet baby James. Baby boy, Nashpri's blessed, career new chapter. Baby James. They were going to name him James. You ever been punched so hard you can't breathe? That's what it felt like. They weren't just taking my money. They were taking my name, twisting it into some sick joke. I called Dan first thing in the morning. "They can't do this," I said, voice rough from another sleepless night. "Using my name like that? It's got to be illegal." "Unfortunately, they can name the baby whatever they want," Dan replied. "But you're right about one thing. It's probably calculated to confuse the court, make it harder to contest paternity later." I sat in my truck after hanging up, staring at nothing. The dashboard clock blinked 7:43 a.m., 6 weeks minus 8 days until the hearing, each minute feeling like another nail in a coffin I never asked for. Remember that old saying about time healing all wounds? That's bull. Sometimes time just gives people more opportunity to twist the knife. You know what's worse than having your life torn apart? Having someone explain why you deserve it. 2 weeks before the hearing, Claire's father showed up at Dan's office unannounced. Judge Richard Harrison, retired now, but everyone still called him Judge. I'd only met him twice before, once when Claire and I got engaged, and again at the wedding. Both times he'd looked at me like I was something stuck to his shoe. Dan insisted I sit in on the meeting. The judge settled into the chair across from us, all Brooks Brothers suit and calculated presence. Even retired, he carried that courtroom authority like cologne. "Let's be frank," he said, adjusting his gold cufflinks. "This situation doesn't need to become messier than it already is." I gripped the armrests of my chair. "With all due respect, sir, I'm not the one who made it messy." The judge's smile didn't reach his eyes. "James, I understand you're hurt, but dragging my daughter through court, demanding invasive tests, it's not going to help anyone, especially not the baby." There it was, the baby card. Like I was the bad guy for wanting proof I wasn't being scammed. "Claire's health is delicate right now," he continued. "The stress of a court battle could have serious consequences. Is that what you want on your conscience?" Dan leaned forward. "Judge Harrison, your daughter's claims about the timeline of this pregnancy are irrelevant," the judge cut in. "What's relevant is how this looks. A soldier, fresh from deployment, publicly accusing his pregnant wife of infidelity? The optics alone." My jaw clenched so hard it hurt. I'd spent 13 months fixing vehicles in 120-degree heat, dodging mortars, and watching good men die. Now this guy was lecturing me about optics? "We're prepared to be generous in the settlement," he said, pulling out some papers. "Full divorce, clean break, minimal contact, but you dropped the paternity challenge." I stood up so fast my chair scraped against the floor. "I think we're done here." The judge's face hardened. "Son, you're making a mistake." "No, sir. The mistake was thinking Claire and her boyfriend could play me for a fool." He left, but his warning hung in the air like smoke. Dan looked worried. "He still got pull with the local courts, James. This could get complicated." I needed a drink. Bad. The VFW was my sanctuary, somewhere I could sit quietly with people who understood what service meant. No questions, no drama, just the comfort of familiar faces and cold beer. But that night, even that got poisoned. I was nursing my second Budweiser when Brent walked in like he owned the place. Designer polo, fresh tan, that smug grin I wanted to wipe off his face. He spotted me and headed straight over. James, just the man I wanted to see. Every veteran in the place tensed up. They knew me, knew my story. The bartender, Mike, former Marines, moved closer to our end of the bar. "You need to leave," I said quietly. Brent leaned against the bar. "Come on, man. Can't two guys have a civilized conversation?" Nothing about this is civilized. He ordered a craft beer, some fancy IPA that probably cost more than my dinner. "Look, I get it. You're mad. But let's be real here. You were just the warm-up act. The placeholder while Claire figured out what she really wanted. The bottle in my hand could have shattered with how hard I was gripping it. She needed someone who was actually there," he continued. "Not some guy playing mechanic in the desert." "Playing mechanic?" My voice was dangerous now. "While you were renovating suburbia, I was keeping men alive." He shrugged. "And now, you're just the angry ex who can't let go. Claire was right about you. Too rigid, too controlling. No wonder she—" I didn't remember standing up, didn't remember following him out to the parking lot. But suddenly we were there, under the yellow security lights, and my fist was cocked back. Brent didn't flinch, just smiled that practiced smile. "Do it. Prove Claire right about your anger issues. Make my day." My hand trembled. One punch. That's all it would take to feel better. But then I thought about Claire's father, about court dates and consequences, about everything I'd fought for. I lowered my fist. "Smart move, soldier," Brent smirked. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got a pregnant woman waiting at home." "You're home, actually." He walked away, keys jingling, while I stood there in the gravel lot, tasting blood from biting my cheek so hard. 3 days after the parking lot showdown, Dan called with news that made my stomach drop through the floor. "They filed updated paperwork for the birth certificate," he said, his voice tight. "They're planning to name the baby James." I sat down hard in my kitchen chair. "My name?" "James Michael. Your exact first and middle names. Claire's claiming it's to honor you, but it's to screw with the court records," I finished. The room felt too small suddenly, like back in Afghanistan when we'd get boxed into tight spaces during maintenance checks. Make it harder to prove which James is the real father. Exactly. It's manipulative as hell, but technically legal. Dan's frustration crackled through the phone. "I'm sorry, James. We can file an objection, but it won't do anything." I rubbed my face, feeling the stubble I'd stopped bothering to shave. They're going to get away with this, aren't they? You ever have one of those moments where everything just breaks? Where you realize all your training, all your discipline, means nothing against people who fight dirty? The hits kept coming. Claire started a blog, one of those polished wellness journey things with perfect photos and carefully crafted captions. Only these posts weren't about green smoothies or yoga poses. They were about me. Learning to Heal, My Journey Away from Military Marriage Trauma, read the first one. She wrote about walking on eggshells during my deployment, about concerning changes in my behavior. Painted herself as this brave survivor, breaking free from a controlling husband with untreated PTSD. I'd never raised my voice to her, never even slammed a door. But there it was in black and white. I was the villain in her story. The posts spread like wildfire through our social circle. Friends stopped calling. Neighbors who used to wave now hurried inside when they saw me. At church, where Claire and I had gotten married 6 years ago, someone actually moved pews when I sat down. Remember that medal I mentioned? The one my CO gave me? I started carrying it everywhere, running my thumb over its edges when things got bad. Funny how a piece of metal can feel like the only solid thing in your world. Then came that day at the pharmacy. I was picking up some sleep aids, because who can rest when their life's imploding, right? The whispers started as soon as I walked in. 2 women by the vitamin aisle glancing my way, then quickly looking down. The pharmacist's smile seemed forced, mechanical. "Poor Claire," I heard one woman murmur. "Can you imagine?" My hands started shaking so bad I could barely sign the credit card slip. The pharmacist asked if I was okay, and all I could do was nod. Just nod and get out before I lost it completely. That night, I sat in my empty house, the house I dreamed about coming home to. and stared at my phone. Dan's number was right there, along with all his patient voicemails about next steps and legal strategies. But what was the point? Claire had won. She'd turned me into exactly what she needed me to be, the unstable ex-soldier, too damaged to fight back. The delete button felt heavy under my thumb. One press, and it would be over. No more court dates, no more whispers, no more watching my name and reputation get dragged through the mud. Just quiet surrender. You know what the worst part was? Part of me started believing her version. Maybe I was too rigid, too focused on right and wrong. Maybe normal people could accept miracles and impossible pregnancies and just move on. Maybe I was the problem. I pulled up Dan's contact info, hovered my thumb over delete. In the quiet of that room, with nothing but the hum of the fridge I'd fixed myself, I started to erase the last person still fighting in my corner. I stared at those withdrawal papers until the words blurred together. The pen felt like it weighed a ton in my hand. One signature and I could disappear, just like Claire and Brent wanted, just like everyone expected the broken soldier to do. My phone buzzed. I almost ignored it, thinking it was Dan again. But the name made me pause. Ed Morales, my old CO from the motor pool, the one who'd given me that medal I still carried. I hadn't heard from him since the deployment ended. James. His voice had that same steady rumble I remembered from briefings. You got a minute? Yes, sir. The response was automatic, muscle memory from years of service. Drop the sir. I heard about your situation. Been meaning to reach out. He cleared his throat. Listen, I'm working as a state investigator now. Fraud cases, mostly. Yesterday I was checking permits at a construction site when I overheard something interesting. My hand tightened on the phone. What kind of something? Your friend Brent was there, running his crew. He was bragging to some supplier about rigging the clock on you. Said something about how timing is everything when you're setting up a paternity trap. The withdrawal papers suddenly felt very far away. Rigging the clock? James, I think he was talking about those prenatal records Claire's using, the ones showing how far along she is. Ed's voice dropped lower. Look, can you meet me? This isn't a phone conversation. An hour later, I was sitting across from Ed at a quiet diner off the highway. He looked exactly the same. Barrel chest, salt and pepper hair trimmed regulation neat, that half smile that meant he was 3 steps ahead of everyone else. The only difference was the investigator's badge clipped to his belt instead of military brass. Here's what I know, Ed said, sliding his coffee aside. Brent's got a pattern. He specializes in remodeling medical offices. Built 3 urgent care clinics last year alone. Lots of connections in healthcare. You think he knows someone who'd fake pregnancy records? I think he knows exactly who to pay off. Ed leaned forward. Listen, son, I've seen dirtbags like this before. They count on good men giving up, breaking down. But that's not how we operate, is it? The familiar tone hit me like a blast of cold air. How many times had Ed's voice pulled me through impossible repair jobs, kept me focused when mortars were falling? No, sir, I said quietly. It's not. Then here's what we're going to do. He pulled out a small notebook. I've got resources now, legal ones. We're going to trace every document, every appointment, every dollar that moved between Brent and those clinics. And when we find proof they backdated those records, that half smile turned sharp. We'll bury him in truth. Something stirred in my chest. Something I hadn't felt since before Claire dropped her bombshell. Purpose, direction, the comfort of having a mission again. Why help me? I had to ask. You've got bigger cases than this. Ed's eyes met mine. Because 18 years ago, I was you. Different scenario, same kind of betrayal. Someone helped me then. Now I'm helping you. He tapped the table. Besides, fraud is fraud. Whether it's millions from the government or 18 years of child support from a veteran, stealing is stealing. I thought about that medal in my pocket, the one Ed had given me. For when things don't make sense, he'd said. Maybe this was why. What's our first move? I asked. First, you're going to take those withdrawal papers you brought and shred them. When I started to ask how he knew, he just smiled. Then we're going to work this exactly like we worked in the motor pool. Methodical, thorough, and completely by the book. Because when we're done, he pulled out his phone, already queuing up files. Brent's going to learn what happens when you try to scam a mechanic and a fraud investigator at the same time. For the first time in weeks, my hands were steady. The withdrawal papers stayed in my pocket, unsigned. I had a toolbox again. Different tools maybe, but the same precise purpose. Find the problem, break it down, fix it. Ed was right. That's how we operate. For the next 3 weeks, Ed and I worked like we were back in Afghanistan, except instead of fixing engines under mortar fire, we were piecing together a fraud case, one document at a time. The rhythm felt familiar. Identify the target, gather intel, execute with precision. Phone records first, Ed had said, spreading papers across his desk at the state investigator's office. Every call, every text between Brent and anyone at Memorial Hospital. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, reminding me of long nights in the motor pool. We do this clean, by the book. I nodded, settling into the spare chair. Just like diagnosing a busted transmission. Start with the obvious points of failure. Exactly. Ed's fingers flew over his keyboard. And our friend Brent? He's got more failure points than a 70s Pinto. The wiretap authorization came through 2 days later. Ed had connections with the DA's office, something about previous contractor fraud cases. We didn't need much. Brent couldn't shut up about his schemes when he thought no one was listening. Got something, Ed said one morning, pressing play on a recorded call. Brent's voice filled the room, talking to someone named Sarah about adjusting some paperwork and making the dates work. The payment followed shortly after, $5,000 transferred from Brent's business account to a Sarah Martinez, RN. Labor and delivery nurse, Ed confirmed, pulling up her employee file. Been at Memorial for 6 years. No disciplinary record until now. I leaned back, remembering how Claire had insisted on using Memorial Hospital despite it being across town from our house. She was their inside person? Looks that way. Ed started building a timeline on his whiteboard. Sarah backdated Claire's first prenatal visit by almost 2 months. Makes the conception date line up with when you were still home. The betrayal burned fresh, but differently now. Not the raw acid of before, but something focused, purposeful. We can prove it? Oh, we can prove it. Ed pulled out another file. See these intake forms? Different paper stock. Hospital switched suppliers 8 months ago. Sarah used old forms to create fake backdated records. Amateur mistake. We worked methodically after that. Ed subpoenaed bank records showing exactly when Brent paid Sarah. I dug through my deployment papers, proving down to the hour when I'd left the country. The evidence mounted. Fake ultrasound dates, altered medical records, even text messages where Brent coached Claire on what to tell her OB-GYN. Look at this, Ed said one afternoon, holding up a printout. Brent's done this before. 3 years ago, different state. Charges were dropped when the husband gave up fighting. I thought about that husband, whoever he was, probably paying child support right now for someone else's kid. The familiar weight of my service medal pressed against my leg through my pocket. Not this time. We assembled the court exhibits like we used to prep vehicles for inspection, everything labeled, organized, backed up with supporting documents. Ed's office became our war room, walls covered in timelines and connection charts. The physical work felt good, gave my hands something to do besides shake with anger. Remember that transmission we rebuilt outside Kandahar? Ed asked one night as we finished notarizing another affidavit. The one everyone said was hopeless? I smiled slightly. Took us 3 days, but we got it running. Because we didn't quit. He squared up the papers with practiced precision. And we didn't cut corners. By the end of the 3rd week, we had it all. Recorded phone calls, bank transfers, falsified medical records, and sworn statements from 2 other hospital employees who'd witnessed Sarah's document tampering. Everything triple-checked, everything court-ready. One last piece, Ed said, pulling out a thick manila envelope. Inside was a subpoena for Sarah Martinez, compelling her to testify about the fraudulent records. She'll flip on them the second she's under oath. Medical license on the line tends to focus the mind. I stared at the stack of evidence we'd built. Somewhere in my chest, that military precision clicked back into place, the steady rhythm of knowing exactly what needed to be done and having the tools to do it. Ed held up the subpoena, his half-smile firmly in place. Tomorrow, we hit court, and we hit hard. The courtroom felt smaller than I'd imagined. Maybe it was all those TV shows with their dramatic high ceilings and mahogany everywhere. This was just a regular county courthouse. Fluorescent lights, worn carpet, and the faint smell of coffee that reminded me of late-night mission briefings. Claire sat with her legal team, wearing one of those flowing maternity dresses that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Brent lounged next to her in a tailored suit, looking more like he was at a country club than a court hearing. The confidence rolled off them in waves. That changed the moment Sarah Martinez took the stand. You could see the exact second Claire realized things were falling apart. Sarah's hands shook as she arranged herself in the witness box, but her voice came out clear and steady. "Yes, Your Honor. I altered the medical records at Mr. Callister's request. He paid me $5,000 to backdate Mrs. Whelan's first prenatal visit." Claire's attorney jumped up, objecting about hearsay and procedural issues. The judge, a stern-faced woman who'd been taking notes since the hearing began, shut him down with a single look. "The court has the bank records," she said, holding up one of Ed's exhibits. "Continue, Ms. Martinez." Sarah glanced at Claire, then back at her hands. Mrs. Whelan knew about the alterations. She was present when Mr. Callister gave me the money. They wanted the dates to show she was already pregnant before her husband deployed. The room went dead quiet. Even the court reporter's fingers stopped clicking. "And why are you telling us this now?" the judge asked. "Because it was wrong," Sarah said simply. "I could lose my nursing license. I have 3 kids to support. I can't—" She swallowed hard. "I can't lie under oath." Ed had been right about the medical license being a powerful motivator. Claire's mask finally cracked. She whispered something urgent to her lawyer, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. Brent started to stand, probably planning another smooth talk session, but Ed was faster. "Your Honor," he said, "we have recorded phone conversations between Mr. Callister and Ms. Martinez discussing the fraudulent documentation." He handed over another file, "as well as text messages coordinating the falsification of ultrasound dates." The judge took a long look at the evidence, then at Claire and Brent. Her expression could have frozen hell over. "This court takes a very dim view of attempted paternity fraud." She turned to Claire's attorney. "Counselor, do you have anything to add in your client's defense?" He stood slowly, straightening his tie. "Your Honor, in light of this new evidence, we would like to request a brief recess to—" Denied. The judge's gavel crack made everyone jump. This court finds clear and convincing evidence of deliberate paternity fraud. The petition for child support is denied. Furthermore, all financial claims against Mr. Whelan are hereby dismissed. She looked directly at me for the first time. "The divorce is granted, effective immediately." Just like that, 13 months of hell ended with a few sharp words and a gavel strike. But the judge wasn't finished. She turned to the bailiff. "Please detain Mr. Callister for questioning regarding insurance fraud and witness tampering. The DA's office will want to speak with him." Brent's smooth facade finally cracked. "Now wait a minute. Remove him," the judge ordered. I watched the bailiff lead Brent out, his expensive suit not quite hiding the slump in his shoulders. Claire sat frozen, one hand pressed against her stomach, the other gripping her phone, probably trying to delete that blog of hers before anyone could archive it. Too late. Ed had already downloaded everything. The judge gave final instructions about signing papers and filing deadlines, but I barely heard them. The weight that had been crushing my chest for months was finally lifting. I felt lightheaded, almost dizzy with relief. Outside the courtroom, reporters had somehow already gathered. Cameras flashed as Brent was led away in handcuffs, his contractor's license about to become as worthless as his promises. Claire pushed through the crowd with her head down, ignoring questions about her wellness blog and the fraudulent pregnancy claims. Ed appeared at my shoulder, that familiar half-smile in place. "Not bad for a couple of grease monkeys, huh?" I touched the service medal in my pocket, the one that had reminded me to keep fighting when things stopped making sense. "Thank you," I said quietly. He just nodded, understanding everything I wasn't saying. We'd rebuilt plenty of broken things in the service. This time, we'd rebuilt something more important: the truth. The drive home from court felt surreal, like I was floating through someone else's life. You ever have one of those moments where everything changes so fast your brain can't quite catch up? That was me, cruising down familiar streets that suddenly felt brand new. I pulled into my driveway and killed the engine. The house stood there, same as always. 2 stories of brick and siding, carefully maintained lawn, even that crooked shutter Claire always said she'd fix. But something had shifted. Maybe it was knowing she'd never walk through that door again, or maybe it was just me who'd changed. Remember those clearing missions in Afghanistan? How we'd sweep a building room by room, checking every corner? That's how I moved through the house. Each space held memories I had to face down. The kitchen where we'd shared morning coffee, the living room where she'd curl up with her laptop working on that damn blog. Even the smell was different now, less of her fancy candles, more of just emptiness. I stood in our bedroom doorway, staring at the walk-in closet she'd insisted on when we bought the place. Half of it still held her things, Designer clothes, shoes lined up like soldiers, those expensive purses she needed for her image. The sight of it all hit me like a punch to the gut. Not because I missed her, but because I finally saw how little of me had ever really lived in this space. You know what's funny? The thing that broke me wasn't any of her stuff. It was finding my old army duffel stuffed in the back corner, covered in dust. The same bag that had followed me through 3 deployments, relegated to storage like some embarrassing secret. That's when I knew. I couldn't stay here. I grabbed the duffel, dumped it on the bed, and started packing. Just the essentials: clothes, tools, my grandfather's watch, the few photos that didn't have Claire in them. The medal from Ed went in my pocket where it belonged. Everything else could go with the house. The realtor sounded surprised when I called, but she didn't ask questions. Just said she'd have the paperwork ready in the morning. Smart woman. Remember that uncle of mine? The one who used to tell those wild stories about Vietnam at family reunions? He'd left me his hunting cabin up in the woods when he passed last year. Claire had laughed at the idea of ever living there. What would I post about? Squirrels? But now? Now it felt like a lifeline. The drive north took about 3 hours. With each mile, the suburbs thinned out until finally there was nothing but trees and sky. The cabin sat at the end of a gravel road, looking exactly like it had the last time I'd visited Uncle Jack. A little worn around the edges maybe, but solid. Real. The key was right where he'd always kept it, under that fake rock he swore fooled everyone. Inside smelled of dust and old wood smoke, but underneath was something familiar: motor oil and metal. Uncle Jack's workspace. He'd been a mechanic too, though he worked on bigger things than I did. The silence hit hard once I'd brought in my stuff. No traffic noise, no humming appliances, no notifications pinging from phones or laptops. Just wind in the trees and the occasional bird call. The kind of quiet that makes you hear your own thoughts. I walked the property as the sun set, relearning the paths Uncle Jack had shown me years ago. The old barn around back was still standing, its metal roof rusted but intact. The padlock took some convincing, WD-40 and patience, just like working on engines, but finally gave way. And there it was, tucked in the back corner under a tarp. Uncle Jack's pride and joy. A beat-up Army Humvee he'd bought at auction, swearing he'd restore it someday. The tarp came away in a cloud of dust, revealing olive-drab paint faded to almost gray. The tires were flat, battery dead, and I could spot at least 3 major fluid leaks from where I stood. But man, looking at that old wreck, I felt something I hadn't in months. Purpose. This was something I could fix. Something real and honest that wouldn't pretend to be anything other than what it was. I put my hand on the hood, feeling the solid metal beneath years of grime. The woods around me were quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet now. Not empty, just peaceful. The Humvee became my therapy. Every morning I'd wake up before dawn, brew coffee strong enough to strip paint, and head out to the barn with my toolbox. There's something calming about starting your day knowing exactly what needs fixing. First job was getting that beast up on blocks. No point doing anything else until I could work underneath. The jack groaned like it hadn't been used since Desert Storm, but it held. Kind of reminded me of my first deployment, actually. We had this ancient lift in the motor pool that made the same sound, and everyone swore it was haunted by some sergeant who died changing oil. "You're looking rough, old girl," I told the Humvee, scraping at decades of rust with a wire brush. The metal underneath was still good, though. That's the thing about military vehicles. They're built to last, even when people try their best to break them. I kept a running list on a whiteboard: transmission fluid leak, shot brake lines, corroded fuel pump, seized steering box, the kind of problems that would make most people call a junkyard. But for me, each item crossed off felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. You ever notice how working with your hands quiets your mind? There's no room for dwelling on betrayal when you're knuckle-deep in an engine rebuild. The smell of grease and metal shavings replaced memories of Claire's expensive perfume. The rhythm of socket wrenches drowned out echoes of courthouse conversations. Ed showed up one Saturday morning, carrying a six-pack and wearing that grin that always meant good news. He didn't even wait to crack open a beer before spilling it. Guess who just filed Chapter 7? He settled onto my workbench, watching me wrestle with a stubborn timing belt. Who? Callister Construction. Seems Brent's reputation took a bigger hit than we thought. Clients started pulling contracts. Suppliers wouldn't extend credit. Ed's smile got wider. Amazing what happens when people find out you're willing to commit fraud. I had to laugh, not because I enjoyed someone else's misery. I'd had enough of that. But because karma sometimes works exactly like it should. Couldn't have happened to a nicer guy. You should see his social media. Complete meltdown. Keeps posting about how everyone's against him, how the system's rigged. Ed shook his head. Sound familiar? Yeah, except I was actually telling the truth. I wiped my hands on a shop rag. How's the transmission looking? We spent the rest of the afternoon working on the Humvee, talking about everything and nothing. Ed told stories from his investigator job. I shared my plans for the cabin. It felt like old times in the motor pool, except now we were both a little grayer and a lot wiser. Life settled into a rhythm after that. Up with the sun, work on the Humvee until lunch, then tackle whatever the cabin needed. I split enough firewood to last 3 winters, fixed the leaky roof, and finally got the well pump working right. Simple tasks, but satisfying. Started keeping a journal, too, something the base counselor had suggested years ago that I'd always brushed off. Nothing fancy, just notes about progress on the Humvee or ideas for the cabin. Sometimes I'd catch myself writing about deeper stuff, how the silence didn't feel so heavy anymore, how I was sleeping better, how anger had faded to something more like pity. Then, one morning, mixed in with bills and junk mail, I found a letter with familiar handwriting. Claire's. My hands didn't shake when I picked it up, which felt like its own kind of victory. I sat on the porch steps, listening to birds argue in the trees while I turned the envelope over. The old me would have torn it open immediately, desperate for explanations or apologies. But I just sat there, feeling the weight of it, realizing I didn't need whatever was inside to keep moving forward. The Humvee's new engine parts had arrived yesterday. The steering box was finally cooperating, and somewhere in the woods, a woodpecker was tapping out its own rhythm of rebuilding. The letter felt heavier than it should have, like Claire had managed to pack all her manipulation into 3 folded sheets. I'd gotten pretty good at reading her over the years, could practically see the careful word choices, the strategic emotional pulls, before I even broke the seal. You know that feeling when you're about to step on an IED? That electric tension in your gut that screams danger before your brain catches up? That's what hit me as I finally opened her letter. Some instincts you never lose. Dear James, it started. Already wrong. She'd called me Jim for 12 years. The formality was calculated, just like everything else. I hope this letter finds you well. Classic Claire, acting like she was writing to a distant cousin instead of the man whose life she'd tried to destroy. I leaned back against the porch railing, morning sun warming my shoulders as I read on. The words blurred together in a familiar pattern. Justification, deflection, thin regret. I was lost, she wrote. The deployment was so hard. As if my being in Afghanistan had somehow forced her to get pregnant by another man and try to legally trap me. Remember those old magic eye pictures where you had to unfocus your eyes to see the real image? Reading between Claire's lines was like that. Every "I'm sorry if you felt hurt" carried an unspoken, "but it wasn't really my fault." Every mention of moving forward was really about moving her agenda forward. Then came the kicker, right there on page 2. I think we should meet for the baby's sake. He deserves to know the man who... I didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. The sheer audacity of it, trying to use her child with Brent as emotional leverage, made my jaw clench. She'd lost every legal claim, watched her reputation crater, and still thought she could pull strings. Walking to the fire pit out back, I struck a match. The flame caught the corner of her letter, and I watched her carefully crafted words curl into ash. No dramatic gestures, no angry tossing, just letting go, like dropping off old batteries at the recycling center. The garage was cool and familiar when I stepped inside, smelling of WD-40 and fresh paint. The Humvee sat there gleaming, every inch restored by my own hands. No more rust, no more seized parts, no more ghosts of what used to be. I ran my palm along the hood, smooth now like it just rolled off the assembly line. 13 months of war, 13 months of betrayal, 13 months of rebuilding. And here we both were, better than before. The hood slammed down with a solid, satisfying thunk. Final touch. Done. That evening I took her up to Miller's Point. This overlook just outside town where you can see clear to the next county. The Humvee's engine purred like it was fresh from Detroit, eating up the steep grade like it was nothing. Kind of funny how the same road that used to make Claire complain about her delicate constitution felt just right in a military-grade vehicle. I parked facing west, killed the engine, and let the silence settle. The sun was doing that thing it does in Indiana summers, painting the sky in colors that'd make an artist weep. Pure reds bleeding into deep purples, like nature's version of a welding torch. Somewhere down in that valley, Claire was probably sitting in her carefully curated living room, waiting for a response that would never come. Maybe she was explaining to Brent why they needed to maintain connections. Maybe she was drafting another letter, trying different words to achieve the same old goals. But up here, the only sound was cooling metal and distant crickets. The only agenda was watching day fade into night. The only reconstruction needed had already been done. I pulled out my journal, leather-bound, simple, honest. Added one line, Humvee restoration complete. Then, after a moment's thought, me too. The sunset deepened, stars starting to punch through like drill bits through sheet metal. Clear sky, clear mind, clear path forward. Sometimes the best response is no response at all. The morning air had that special kind of bite, the sort that reminds you you're alive. Standing in my gravel driveway, I adjusted the American flag mounted on the restored Humvee's antenna. The fabric snapped in the breeze, colors sharp against the pale Indiana sky. Funny how something as simple as a flag can ground you, remind you where you've been and who you are. My phone buzzed. Text from Ed. Channel 5 just ran the story. Brent's license officially revoked. Company's done. I didn't need to watch the news to know how it played out. Brent's contracting business had collapsed like a house built on sand. Word travels fast in small towns, and nobody wants a proven fraud touching their home repairs. Last I heard, he couldn't even get work hanging drywall 2 counties over. The screen lit up again. This time, it was a link to Claire's defunct wellness blog. Now, just a blank page with a content removed notice. Her carefully curated image of the enlightened suburban guru had shattered. Hard to maintain that wholesome, truth-telling persona when court records show you tried to commit paternity fraud. Remember those military training exercises where we'd strip down engines, then rebuild them better than factory spec? That's what these past months had been. Breaking everything down to bare metal, then building back stronger. The Humvee was proof of that. Every bolt, every weld, every coat of paint done by my own hands. I ran my palm along the hood. The metal was cool and smooth, nothing like the rusted heap I'd found in that barn. The engine compartment was clean enough to eat off of. New seals, fresh fluids, 0 leaks. Even installed some upgrades the Army never thought to add. She wasn't just restored, she was enhanced. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Claire and Brent had been spinning their web of lies, I'd been here in the garage, turning wreckage into reliability. They'd gambled everything on deception. I'd bet it all on honest work and patience. Their house of cards had fallen. My Humvee stood ready for anything. Loading up my gear felt right, simple. Each bag and toolbox found its place, just like in the service. No excess, no waste, nothing left behind that mattered. The cabin would wait for my return, a solid base, not a prison of memories. The driver's seat welcomed me like an old friend. Dashboard pristine, gauges clear, everything exactly where it should be. Through the windshield, I could see down the valley where my old life used to be. Somewhere down there, Claire was probably trying to rebuild her own reputation, one carefully worded social media post at a time. Brent was likely updating his resume, trying to explain away that fraud conviction. But their problems weren't mine anymore. I turned the key. The engine caught immediately, settling into that familiar diesel rumble that every soldier knows by heart. Clean power, no hesitation. In the rearview mirror, I caught sight of that flag again, still dancing in the wind. Below it, the fresh paint job gleamed, not the standard Army green, but a deep metallic gray I'd chosen myself. New color, same backbone. The gear shift slid into drive with military precision. No grinding, no slop in the linkage, just smooth, certain engagement. Kind of like how truth cuts through lies. No drama needed, just pure function. They'd thought I would crumble, expected me to accept their fiction, pay their bills, carry their shame. Instead, I'd done what mechanics do: identify the problem, gather the right tools, rebuild with better parts. The Humvee wasn't just transportation anymore. It was a rolling reminder that some things can't be broken. They can only be reforged. The engine's rumble echoed off the garage walls as I eased forward into the morning light. No more court dates, no more legal fees, no more looking back. Just open road ahead and enough horsepower to climb any hill. They'd tried to write my story for me, but in the end, I'd rebuilt it myself. One bolt, one truth, one day at a time. They thought I'd fold. I rebuilt instead. I believe stories like this find us for a reason. If this one touched you, please subscribe. I share a new one every day, and tomorrow's might be the one your heart's been waiting for.